Sophianic broadcast featuring visionary teacher John Lamb Lash. Today is the 13th of March 2018. This is Ginny Thwaite recording a conversation with John Lamb Lash. John, you've been off air for 2 months. Your last recorded talk, which you uploaded to the MED channel, was The Beauty That Kills. And I'm sure there are many people out there longing to hear from you again. So would you like to start by telling people where you've been and why the silence?
Certainly. There's always silence, and silence is a part of this transmission, in fact. So when I go into silence, I transmit in a certain way. When I speak, like I'm speaking now, I transmit in another way, but I would have you bear in mind that the silent way is always present, even when I'm being vocal. Apart from that fancy, esoteric explanation, I was traveling. It's been almost exactly 2 months, hasn't it?
Yeah.
The ritual for the Charlotte working was performed, that's passive voice. No, I performed the ritual for the Charlotte working with the attendance of witnesses around the world. That was quite thrilling. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I mean, you had support literally all over Gaia's body. We had people in the Isle of Skye, people in Virginia, Missouri, Spain, very special people in Australia.
The team down under, the Dreamtime team.
The Dreamtime team.
Yeah.
So thrilling support that you got on that day.
Yeah, really, I've been very encouraged. Those of you who listen to me and follow me, coming from the GNA, coming from interviews that I began to give 10 years ago when my book came out, or more recently through the YouTube channel, will know, all of you will probably know that I've done these rituals a lot in the mountains of Andalusia, the Serrania de Ronda especially, that being a kind of sorcerer's paradise because it provides the ideal environment to do courtings. And I've done many of them on my own. I've done numerous ones with others, and other people in PT have done their own courtings. But this is the first time, January 14th, 2018, when there was a courting and a ritual performed by the Nahual, being the principal teacher of planetary Tantra. And it was supported and witnessed simultaneously by people all around the world. So let it be recorded in the annals of planetary Tantra that that was a first-time event. And I have been thrilled and honored by the participation people have brought to this event.
Not only participation with friends and allies who you invited to participate with you, but people that follow the MED channel were there for you 100% as well. The commentary in the YouTube channel was fantastic. I mean, people really loved being involved in this practice.
Yeah, really, the level of participation has been just premium, and the respect and sobriety, the sanity, the balance, and the courage that people have shown by their comments has really inspired me. I've never done anything like this. Years ago, starting in 2002 and 2003, when I broke into clairaudient communication with the planetary animal mother, I did many of these courtings on my own, alone, out in the solitary realms of the mountains. So I can say happily that planetary Tantra has grown incrementally and has really come forward in those, 15 years now. Also, I want to say that every single person who participates does so in the freedom of their own mind and their own choice. One of the beautiful features of planetary tantra is that it is elective and selective. You self-select into it. No one is recruited. It's not a cult. No one is being indoctrinated or mind controlled. It's participation is elective. And those of you who chose to join me in the Charlotte working did so in a manner of action and a form of warrior participation that I find really admirable. So I'm very grateful.
You've been travelling then, and what else?
Since then, in the last 2 months, I like to say the American Eagle flies over Europe. That's a way of saying that I have a role I've assigned to myself since I came to Europe, and I wrote Not in His Image in Europe. Of course, it is a book in the defense of the indigenous spiritual tradition, the indigenous pagan ways of the European peoples. So oddly, there I am, an American who is in Europe as the champion of the revival of the indigenous genius of the European peoples. And I love to say that, and I love to be in that role. And so I fly over Europe and I look down on the countries and I keep an eagle eye on them. But there's an odd thing that happens when I fly, which has come to light recently. That is to say, those who are close in my team, like Ginny and a few others, have noticed what we don't call it a coincidence. We call it a coinky-dinky.
Well, we call it a coinky-dinky if it is actually a coincidence.
Yeah, a genuine one.
But through all of our truth-seeking and developing our Matangi eyes, how to view events that happen in the social arena.
Yeah, right.
Coincidences are now called coincidences.
Right.
Of the current Jewish royal family.
Right. An example of a coincidence, by contrast to a genuine coinky-dinky, is this, and this looks forward to probably what will be the second topic, the topic of our second conversation, which will be the Florida event that took place. It so happens that Parkland, the meaning of the word Parkland, which is the locale of the Florida event, is the same as it means paddock. If you go and look back at it, it means paddock. So it's a coincidence that the Las Vegas event is coded with the word paddock, and the Florida event is coded with the word Parkland, where the sheeple, where the animals are kept.
The herd.
The herd. Keep the herd in order. Control the herd. Feed the herd with drama.
The tax cattle herd.
The tax cattle herd, the farm animals. So that's a coincidence. In other words, it's a deliberately orchestrated factor in a mind-controlled theater that is more or less ongoing.
But a coinky-dinky
is a genuine apposition or parallelism of events. For example, I have noted when the American Eagle flew in October of last year, I have noted that as soon as I set foot on the ground in Stockholm, Sweden, and walked into the airport, the first thing I saw on the television monitors was the news about the Las Vegas Harvest Route 91 Festival massacre. It happened while I was in the air. That was October 1st, right?
Yeah.
Last year.
Yeah.
And let's recall always, those of you who followed the MED, that I designated that event as the turning point event when the Mandela effect, as it had been previously known, was finished, because the planetary animal mother had achieved her goal of getting your attention, and she was shifting her tactics to another kind of operation of supernatural magic, another aspect of her intervention, which is to say she was bringing the ray of the third attention directly into the zone of the first attention. That happened on October 1st while I was in the air. Now, it just so happens that a month ago, tomorrow, I was also in the air. And when I set foot on the ground somewhere in Spain, the first thing that I heard about was the Parkland Douglas School event. So that's 2 cases, okay? 2. That's not a lot, but it prompted me and my team to look back and to consider some other moments. Well, it so happens that there was a previous shooting in Florida. It was called the Fort Lauderdale Airport shooting, right?
Yes.
Now, I didn't know much about that, and I didn't follow it. It kind of went by as a blip on the screen. But it happened in January of 2017 when I was again in the air, flying from south to north. Okay? So there's 3 events. Finally, I would add the one that other people can attest to. Tantrikas and devotees of planetary Tantra came to Andalusia in November of 2015. And there in the mountains of the Serranía de Ronda, we began a 6-day retreat. It's the first planetary Tantra...
Second planetary Tantra retreat.
It's the second retreat, but it's the first one I had ever given on my home ground in Andalusia.
In Treasure Valley, where you found the terma.
In Treasure Valley, where I found the terma, at Witch Haven. It was really quite a extraordinary get-together. And that evening, Friday the 13th, we sat watching the crescent moon, which was the signal for the Dakini shift of that particular shamanic retreat. And that evening was also the evening of the Paris Theatre Massacre.
Backland Theatre.
What is it called?
Backland, I think.
The Backland Massacre or something like that.
Which was total hogwash.
Right. I am not saying, and Ginny and I are not saying, by the way, that these events actually took place. We are of the opinion that they are part of a grotesque orchestration that continues to be played upon the human mind as a way of seeding terror and control.
Yeah, well, I've learnt the hard way to now presume that everything is a psychological operation until proven otherwise.
Right.
So that's my approach for every event that now happens, that the mainstream media are pushing, that we hear about. That's my approach. And it hasn't let me down yet.
And I would add that these events, which I have just cataloged 4 of them, right? Mm-hmm. There have been others as well, that these events are part of a learning experience. They're a challenge to your mind. And they do induce cognitive dissonance, which is their aim. One feature of that cognitive dissonance, which everyone feels, even at the mass level, is, well, did people die? Did they not die? If it's a hoax, were people really killed? Were they not killed? And what I've come to understand now is that people may indeed be killed, really killed, but that doesn't mean that the scenario goes for what it really goes for. I would compare that to the story of the official version of the Holocaust. You know, there is absolutely no doubt that some people of the tribal, the tribal identity of Jewish were killed in World War II. Certainly some were.
Absolutely.
Certainly some were massacred in front of cattle cars. That certainly happened, right? But the story, the narrative that's built on that is a different matter. And the idea that 6 million of them were gassed and burned. That's the narrative. So we find that same technique, which creates cognitive dissonance, happening in these events. For instance, the Las Vegas event, how many people were said to have been killed? 55 or something like that, right?
Well, you never get one
figure,
number, do
right?
you?
It's not to say that no one wasn't killed. The people who do this would kill someone just to create confusion regarding how many people were killed. And then the sheeple go on and they argue, oh, they were really killed, no, they weren't really killed. And that's exactly what the perpetrators want them to do. Right? Mm. So anyway, we're getting savvy about that. And I just wanted to mention at the beginning of this talk, before we get into the more rich and juicy material.
I would just like to add one thing to this. The retreat that was held in Andalusia, and another reason that event was so special, not only did it happen on the same day as the Bacalan Theatre, you led a telestic session that night. There were 6 men and 6 women, is that right?
Yes.
All 6 men experienced the organic light that night. I bumped into one of them in the airport and he was wandering around with this look on his face. I've never seen anything like it. It was wonderful to see him. Beautiful, beautiful experience for the people that were there that night. Yeah,
it was a sublime event at Witch Haven, under the night sky. There were just some supernatural moments, as there always are. And so that was that. So we're not here to reminisce. We're here to talk about certain aspects of the Charlotte working.
Okay. So would you like to tell us about the actual day?
Sure. This courting and this ritual, as you would well know, was unprecedented. It is a novel and original attempt to demonstrate Gaian tantric magic before the eyes of the world. Okay? And so doing it, I was acutely aware that it was not exactly like any other courting that I've done. And I've also done other lethal strikes, and so has Ginny. In fact, she's done more than me, you see. So, whoops, that produced quite an expression. What are these lethal strikes that she's been doing, and others as well? Well, they're practice runs. They're practice runs. And they're simply rituals by which a human animal can direct its anger and its rage toward the psychopaths and the enemies of life, whom you cannot reach, and you will never be able to reach them. So given that's the case, the courting ritual and the lethal strike is a way to direct your anger toward them with an intention, and the more people that do that, the more cumulative effect it's going to have over time.
How did you get the strike, the ritual for the strike? It was a long time ago, wasn't it? It was when you got the terma of Gaia Awakening.
Absolutely. I got the terma in 2008, 10 years ago.
But there was something missing.
Yeah. In the summer of 2008, when I got the terma, it came with a huge number of zip files, you could say.
Well, this is what happens to a tertan. They get downloads. Some of the information can be retained in the body. Some a tertan has to catch while it's coming in, but John has described it before as it's exactly like a download. And then he needs to, at some point, unzip the file. Unfortunately, he's full of files. So, some of it might never come out.
That's right. That's right. The Dakini Intel, DI, or Dakini instruction, that any of you can receive, and do receive, more and more intentionally, as you practice planetary tantra, that intel comes to a tertan in an extreme compression. It comes in the form of zip files. So I got a zip file. I got a number of zip files in the summer of 2008, and one of them was on the lethal strike. And I used to go back and look at that, open that file and look at it now and then, as Turtons are wont to do. And there was something that always troubled me about it. I knew that the intel was incomplete and that the syntax and the ritual procedure for the lethal strike, which you can find on a YouTube clip, right? Those procedures were absolutely correct and impeccable and had to be followed with precision, yet there was something missing. And we talked about that among ourselves, and we used this jargon. We said the command syntax is not complete.
Yeah.
Right.
So we've scratched our heads and our R's, trying to work out what the command syntax was. And in a nutshell, John got taken to Charlotte's Ridge.
Right.
After it was discovered.
On November 8th, I was escorted to Charlotte's Ridge.
And when you go to a place of power in nature, there's a very it can be very subtle, but sometimes it can be a very strong reaction that you get when you. That's how you know you're in a place of power. And I'd been going to this place on my own, and it always made me feel nauseous. I would get to a certain point, and then I would start to feel sick. And so John went there on the 8th of November, and I heard his stomach rumbling. He got past, there's a certain plant at this place, and that's where I always start to feel sick, and I heard his stomach rumbling from...
Literally.
I was about 5 metres away, and I could hear his stomach rumbling.
My stomach was growling from being in the power of Charlotte's Ridge, and I felt slightly nauseous, which I'm used to because this can happen in places of power.
So just to qualify this, Infinity Ridge in Andalusia, which is where you first started having conversations with Sophia.
That's right.
You took me there one day, and I was almost on my hands and knees. I couldn't stand up. The intensity of that place was so powerful, and I literally thought I was going to throw up. I didn't, but I had to spend a lot of time on my knees. It was so intense.
Infinity Ridge had a telluric charm that would bring you to your knees. I've seen people on that ridge writhing in convulsions and like they are about to vomit. This is typical. Don't be freaked.
No,
if
enjoy
this happens
it.
to you.
Enjoy it.
You have to move into it. You're probably not going to get sick, but it is quite normal for you to feel somewhat sick and for you to feel the grip. It gets you in your entrails. It really does. The telluric power of the earth. She goes for your guts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What happened? So you were up on Charlotte's Ridge on the 8th of November.
Right.
Talk about what happened.
Well, I was just feeling the orientation of the place. I had a compass. It's always good to see what the alignment was. I saw the alignment was northwest. Therefore, I knew exactly where the west was. So I addressed the 4 points. You physically place yourself in a kind of mandala of space, a mandala of spatial orientation when you're in a sacred place. Do the same thing when you're looking at the sky. And so I just did the usual procedures, which are second nature to me now, to introduce myself to the place. I went into silent knowing. I announced that I was there to the local spirit of the place. This is a really important thing to do.
Very.
Sometimes there is an ally who lives there. In the old folklore of Europe and other countries, other lands, that was like that creature whom Castaneda called the ally would be like a troll or a fairy type of creature living under a rock or something. Mm-hmm. So you have to, introduce yourself respectfully. It has a lot to do about respect.
It's boundaries and respect.
Boundaries and respect,
Everybody likes good manners.
Everybody does, especially the supernatural beings. And we weren't doing anything like drinking mushroom tea or anything at this time, weren't we? Not at all.
No, we were just on a recce.
Don't need to. So anyway, I felt good, and then I got comfortable and we walked down, and as we were walking away, I got a download in a flash. And in that download came two things mainly. One, I have to say it, was the name of the TI. So I did not name the TI. Two was the remaining part of the command syntax that I had been missing. So what a gift that was the first time I went to the bridge. This is November 8th, 2017. And just what a gift it gave me. You see, you can't do any of this without the backup and boost of the intelligence of the earth.
Which is why you put up the Gaianym Navigator briefing,
the boost of the earth.
Which is so poignant. So poignant.
So relevant, even though it was made during the Gaianym. So I immediately came back and began to brief my small team here in this particular area about the command syntax and how to handle it. Now basically I'm not going to go into a lot of technical Nahuatl jargon. I'll make it as plain and simple as I can. The part that was missing in the command syntax, as we call it, to perform this right was, and I always knew this, and it just was nagging my mind for like 10 years, you know. The part that was missing was the part about how to disclose the right to both to the world at large, that is, everyone can know about it if they want to. If CNN wants to know about it, they can, right? Nothing's hidden, right? It's all out in the open. How to disclose it to the world at large, and how to disclose it for participation to those who want to support the right. There is a very particular way to do that, and then I proceeded to act on that, and that's what you got from January 1st onward on MED.
One of the protocols is that you don't say, one doesn't say the intended target, the name of the target.
Right, this is the use of silence. Ever again. Ever. This is the use of the power of silence, of silent knowing. You do not say that name, ever. You don't have to say it. Others will say it.
And that's how the magic builds, and that's how it works.
That's how the magic spreads. When others say it, they give power to the spell without even knowing that they do so. But you, who are involved in executing the spell and seeing it through, you've got to see it through now. You've got to stick with it. This is something that just isn't over and done on January 14th when it was performed.
Well, it's in the hands of the goddess.
That's right.
You did your bit.
That's right.
It's out of your hands.
That's right.
You didn't choose the TI.
That's right.
You did the ritual.
That's right.
We'll talk about the actual performance of the ritual in a second. You didn't choose the TI, you performed the ritual, and after you'd finished the ritual, it was out of your hands.
That's
so
right.
It's nothing to do with you anymore.
That's right. That's right. One of the really powerful, to me, really powerful realizations, and you can never get your mind around this enough because it's so immense. What I'm going to say now, I cannot get my mind around this. When you perform this autogenic practice with the earth, the consequences and the results are not for you. You will never have any personal, quote, karmic consequences.
Because it's transpersonal.
Because it's totally transpersonal, and you give to her, you command her to do it. This is why it's called command syntax. You command her to do it, and by uniting your intention and your will with her power, there is no consequence for you ever. It's only the consequence that is directed toward the target or the objective of the right. This is something that you can almost not get your mind around. So many religions, including Buddhism, tell you this bullshit about karma. There is no karma. There is no moral law.
Just show me one instance.
Yeah,
where
show
there
me
is
one
karma.
instance.
Show me one instance of a psychopath who's got their karma.
Right.
I'd love to see it.
Yeah, and you know, there's a saying that goes around: no good deed goes unpunished. You know, to me, that's the law of karma. More than, you know, if you did this in another life, this is going to happen to you. It's total bullshit.
Well, karma's a carrot on a stick, isn't it? You know.
It's another part of the Buddhist con game.
Yeah, it's a con game, and we're hoping that John will do an elaborate talk on Buddhism. We've all been waiting for it for a long time. He keeps promising.
So that's another topic for another conversation on Radio Gaianym.
Your new format for speaking.
The new format for speaking.
You've decided you don't want to speak on your own. Can I just say for the record, the last upload that John did to the MED channel, which wasn't the nav briefing, it took you 8 hours to complete that talk. You make it seem so easy and flawless that I think most people don't actually understand the amount of effort, research, time, and what it actually physically takes for you to do an MED upload. So, just so you all know, that one took 8 hours, and it's too much for one man. So, this is the new format. This is the only way we're going to get John to speak, is Radio Gaianym.
I'm really happy with this change of format. And so, let's proceed.
Back to the day.
Back to the day.
Back to the day of the ritual.
Now, there is a timeline for the Charlotte working, which is very precise. And I just want to remind you, I'm not going to go into all details of it, but the timeline will be available on the tracking page that goes along with the Charlotte working page, actually, which is on metahistory.org.
Metahistory is back online.
Right, back online now.
Yeah.
So I can upload this timeline and you can look at the details. Just let me point to the essentials and let me tell you what I went through in the course of performing this ritual. So the chosen day was Sunday, January 14th.
Why did you choose that
16 hours. The celestial timing in the omens, the lunar omens, the lunar increment, the full moon, the 2 full moons in January, the position of Saturn in relation to the moon, the position of Saturn in the constellation of the Archer. There are probably at least 15 really precise and extraordinary components that factored into the timing of this ritual. And this is the kind of thing that you can appreciate years afterward, even though it is timed precisely to that moment. Anyone in the future who goes back and looks at the way it was constructed, according to the sky writing, will learn something from looking at how it was constructed. Yeah. So you don't have to feel that you missed out because you didn't follow all of the omens that were operative at that exact time, okay? But I assure you, the omens operating at that exact time that went into the composition of this ritual were spectacular. And so the year kicked off with the lunar perigee in the constellation of the Archer and the supermoon.
Right, so a lunar perigee, to those people that don't know, is the moon's, in the moon's orbit of the Earth. The perigee is when the moon is closest to the Earth. So John calls it a perigee hit.
Right, and in planetary tantra, you learn to observe each month these perigee hits and the apogee hits, which are the opposite. That's when the moon is most distant from the Earth. And the remarkable fact is, as proven by the experience of so many people now, and a growing number, is you can actually feel these moments. Mm-hmm. You can feel the intensity and the mood of these moments. And it's objective. It's not make-believe, it's not pretending. All those who tune into the moments at the same time verify very often the same effects.
So there was a perigee hit in the Archer constellation.
On the first day of January, and there was the wolf moon. They called it the wolf moon for some reason.
Again, for those people that don't know yet, the constellation of the Archer is constellation of the warrior.
That's right.
The mythography of that constellation is a warrior.
Right. The stories and the narrative connected with this visible constellation, which is not the sign Sagittarius, okay, but the visible constellation, is about the warrior code, the warrior cause, the stance of the warrior, the sorcery of love and intention, the aiming of the warrior, the power of the aim, the forward thrust of the bow, the backward thrust of the bow. All of these components in the visual picture of the archer are part of the practice of the warrior.
And then the Shakti cluster member who is on shift when the new moon is spotted in the constellation of the archer is
Kurukula. And Kurukula played an extremely decisive role in my experience of performing this ritual. So I'm going to explain now how that happened. So I went in, on the timing agreed, and people all around the world in their own time zones attended to that moment. Some of them may have been at work, some of them may have woken themselves up in the middle of the night and just sat in their room for half an hour. Others went out into the woods, others went out into nature and actually in groups did rituals.
Yeah.
Simultaneously,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, it was performed on Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock. And when I came back with my accomplice from Charlotte's Ridge, I had a feeling that something was not quite right in the way I had rigged it. Okay? Now, I want to emphasize that performing a lethal strike is a very special case of a cording. You can perform many cordings for different purposes and different intentions.
Well,
Right?
all cordings are desiridistic magic.
Right.
Desiridistic magic. But you realised that day that a cording for a strike is different.
Right. You perform a cording, and you can find this explained and described in a YouTube clip, which is in the process of revision, by the way, but it is there, in a state of silence and in a ritual concentration. It's like a meditation. It's like a trance state. You may perform it in a trance state using psychoactive plants, or you may simply perform it in a state of heightened awareness, as Castaneda called it, heightened attention. You do not talk, and you perform the cording from beginning to end in that manner. Once you have a cording and you rig it for a lethal strike, this is different. What I learned during this particular event was that the rigging of the cording that has already previously been made is the act of a hunter requiring the skill of a hunter in setting a trap. But it is not necessarily a ritual act that has to be done in the same state of concentration as the cording itself. Is that clear?
Yes, so you're saying that you could spend a few days setting this trap.
That's right. That's right.
It doesn't have to be done in one session.
No.
You can keep going back and fiddling with it. And
You can go back and fiddle with
put
it.
more venom and
Exactly.
and DNA and anger into it.
That's
You can
right.
keep going.
When you're rigging it, of course, you concentrate on your rage, you concentrate on your hatred, you concentrate on the killing intent
And the
you have
target.
toward the target. But you don't necessarily have to be in the kind of dreamy trance state that you're in when you perform the cording itself. Well, I had sort of known this before, but I really came to realize it in a different way when I did the Charlotte working. As I just said, coming back, walking back, I realized, there's something about, I didn't rig the cording quite right. And then I thought to myself, well, I guess I really blew it, I set this whole thing up for this whole moment, this moment when the world was watching.
It's a lot of pressure, John.
I don't call it pressure. It was delightful for me. I felt no pressure. I really didn't. Oh, don't make faces. And yet I thought, well, wait a minute. I didn't rig it correctly. But that's okay. And that will happen to you too. Because the rigging part is like setting a trap. It's something that you do with the hunter skill.
So you're saying that I sound like Kathy Newman. So,
So, yes.
you'll know, your gut will tell you when you've got it right.
Mm-hmm.
So you can keep going back and fiddling with it, and you'll know when you've got it right.
Correct. So what actually happened on that day was I rigged it at the prescribed time. I fitted the nail delicately and precisely into the drawing cord and pulled it into the tension of the whole cording. And the nail was as if held in my palm. It was in the right position, toggling. And as soon as I drew my palm away, the nail flipped and the nail dropped. But the sinker did not hit the ground. Therefore, I rigged the cording wrong. Well, I didn't know what to make of that at the time. That's just the way it happened. I walked away, and I obviously was troubled about it. I was concerned, and I knew something was not right, but I didn't feel that I had blown the ritual. Nonetheless, you've got to bear in mind that novelty and innovation and spontaneity are characteristics of Gaian Tantric ritual. There will always be something wrong, something different, something that does not work quite right. And from observing that, you will learn better how to be skillful with the ritual. And this is a perfect example. So the next day, I was thinking about that, and I made a note of the fact that on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, we were still in the so-called lunar increment. The ritual was designed to be performed in the lunar increment, and we would still be in the lunar increment until Tuesday afternoon. So on Monday, when I was thinking about it and discussing it, I said, look, we're still in the lunar increment. I can go back and re-rig it. It doesn't mean that the ritual was wrong the first time. It just means that it's improved by re-rigging. So I decided to go back and re-rig it, but not on Monday. On Monday, I felt kind of dreamy and odd. I wouldn't say I was really tired, but I lay down and I went to sleep in the afternoon, and this is what happened. I found myself in a lucid dream. I was in an apartment, a nondescript apartment, with a large glass sliding door with an aluminum frame. And the door was partially open on a nondescript little courtyard, maybe, 10 by 15 feet, small courtyard with a sandy bottom. And there was a cat in the dream sitting at the threshold of the doorway and looking out at something in the courtyard. And so the cat drew my attention to the courtyard, and I walked over to the glass, the open doorway, and I looked out and I saw a creature out there sitting in the courtyard on its haunches. And I was puzzled by what this creature was. It was fascinating, and I kind of stared at it, trying to figure out what it was. The first thing that I noticed was that it seemed sort of like a fox. It had a long jaw, like a fox has, with obviously sharp teeth.
What colour was it?
It was reddish, and it had large eyes. And yet I saw that it was not exactly a fox, and it was standing and sitting in profile to me, in profile, as if it were posing for me. But at the same time, there was something menacing about it and something expectant about it. And as I looked at its body, I saw that it had a collar, like a woman would wear a muff, a fox collar, whatever that's called, And
A ruff.
A ruff it had a ruff like some animals have. It had peaked ears, and then it had a body, and I couldn't figure out the body. The body seemed to be the body of an animal, but at the same time the body of a bird, but at the same time the body of a reptile, like a dragon.
So it was mammal,
bird and dragon.
Yeah, okay.
And I'm looking at it with great puzzlement and just gazing at it, thinking, well, what is this creature? And I couldn't put a name to it. but its presence was strong. It was like it was announcing itself to me in profile. And it was saying, look at me, I'm here. So
you didn't work out what the creature was until
after the dream.
Until after the dream. So
right.
What happened next in the dream, in the lucid dream?
Next in the dream, the cat went across the threshold. This is very important in the dream. Threshold between the Nahual and the Tonal, whatever. Threshold to the underworld, to the other world. And went toward the creature as if to confront it, or as if to alert me that I needed to beware that maybe it was some kind of threat. Was this a threat display? It wasn't looking at me directly and snarling, but it was showing me its profile in a most dramatic manner. So the next thing I do is I step out into the courtyard, and I go up to it, and it's quite large. I'm standing there, and its head comes up really almost to my middle of my chest, actually to the level of my arms. And I look down at it, and it's still not attacking me or anything, but it's obviously emanating
hostility,
a hostile vibe toward me. So, in a certain set of moves, which I performed, rather as if they were in slow motion, and very carefully, I moved toward it, and I put my right hand under its throat, on the muff that was around its neck. There was this very distinctive muff which had lines of color in it, of darker and lighter red. I put my right hand around that. I reached around its head with my left hand. I took its jaw in the fingers of my left hand, and I twisted its head around, and I strangled it. The operative word being strangle. I did that in a very sober state. I wasn't angry. There was no snarling. There was no huge confrontation of like an animal fight between me and the animal. But it was an act of murderous violence. I strangled it with my bare hands.
And then did you wake up?
And then I woke up, and I had a really clear memory of the dream as being lucid or semi-lucid dream. All right.
So is that when we sat and talked about what the dream was, or did you go back to re-rig the recording before we worked out?
I can't remember. I think that I talked about it the next morning, which was Monday. Now we've got 3 days here.
Still in
Sunday,
the
first
3-day lunar increment.
Yeah, all in the lunar increment, which is a 72-hour period of time. So, I think we talked about it on the third day, Tuesday, when I went back to re-rig, okay? And I went to research this animal because I knew that this was some kind of animal, and yet I couldn't put a name on it in the dream, but when I researched it, I found the name of this animal.
So, just hang on there a second, because we talked about your dream, and you were describing it as a fox-like creature. That was the predominant description.
That's right.
It was a fox-like creature.
Right, a vixen.
A vixen, and when you got the TI from Sophia, I wasn't comfortable with the choice that she made. But I accepted that she'd made that choice, and I trust you implicitly. So I made it my business to go and investigate this person. And I'm a thorough researcher. And yeah, I mean, I understand why she was picked. But this person, before she became who she became, had the most magnificent fox-like
mane,
auburn,
yes,
beautiful mane.
That's right.
That she wore very long.
That's right.
Stunning hair, absolutely beautiful.
Wavy, reddish, elegant even.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So segue from that to the mythical dream animal. You did that research. I, on my part, as the mythologist, went to search for the name of this creature, and I found out that what I saw was a griffin.
And the griffin, you didn't find out until a bit later on.
That's right.
Is the icon
of the franchise of those
7 spells.
7 spells. It's the icon of the franchise. So, there you have it. What do you make of that? Well, I'll tell you what I make of that. This spell, I conducted this spell under the close surveillance of the Dakini powers of the earth, particularly Kurukula, who was overseeing the spell. The spell was cast in the dark of the moon, we'll get to that in a moment, in the last 3 days of the Kurukula shift.
So Kurukula is all about magic. She takes care of white magic, green magic, yellow magic, red magic, black magic, which isn't what we've been told.
That's right. Black magic is not.
Black magic is actually beautiful. Yeah. They all are. But so she's the
mistress of all colors of magic.
Mistress of magic.
Right.
Yeah.
You can say that yellow magic is magic by which you ask for riches and wisdom. Gold is yellow. Wisdom is yellow. Red is magic by which you ask for lovers, for love, for Blue is magic by which you ask for whatever. So I knew that Kurukula was overseeing this spell, and
you can imagine Kurukula with a bow and arrow.
Right. She corresponds to the constellation of the archer, and Buddhist iconography traditionally pictures her with a bow and arrow. Okay, there you have it. You can run a mythophrenic fugue on that for a few days. So, I concluded, and this is my particular speciality as a Nawal, is to give the syntax. Remember, the Nawal has 2 functions. One is to define syntax, and the other is to steady the approach to the unknown. That's my role. So I had to define, so it was my pleasure to define a rule of Kurukula based on this dream. And here is the rule. And I advise you all strictly to observe this rule with extreme care. When you choose a TI, from here on out, all TIs will be chosen by Kalikas.
So this is a Kurukula instruction.
Right. This
from
is
the Turton.
From the Turton. This is Kurukula instruction. The first case of a lethal strike demonstrated before the eyes of the world occurs with a TI not chosen by any human subject. Thereafter, choose whomever you like. But when you choose a TI now, in the future, in order to know that you are proceeding in concordance with the will and guidance of the planetary animal mother, you must receive a dream omen or some kind of omen that confirms the target you have chosen. Do you see that? Is that clear?
So elaborate a little, because not everybody lucid dreams.
Right.
So if you're not a lucid dreamer, or a lot of people don't even remember their dreams.
It doesn't have to be a lucid dream necessarily.
Well, it doesn't have to be a dream omen. But we're not talking here about, a new age white feather floating down in front of you and, oh, there's an angel. We're talking about, verifiable, physical evidence, which is an omen.
And confirmation that your target is recognized.
Yes.
In other words, the Kurukula instruction is recognition that your target is correct comes from the supernatural world in the form of an omen that identifies your target. Now, in my case, the omen was presented in a magnificently clear way because obviously the griffin creature is the totemic animal of the target. Can you see that?
That was mind-blowing, actually.
That is absolutely mind-blowing.
Yeah.
That is objective external confirmation of a supernatural event. So, every person has their totem animal. Now, it may be that if you choose a target, and by the way, another rule of Kurukula is this is not personal. You never choose a personal target, and you can't use it for personal revenge. If you try, it just won't work. It's a transpersonal magic ritual. You only use it for the elimination of perpetrators and the enemies of life and the Xenosh. Okay? So you choose a target, and you initiate your intention to terminate that target. In that case, Kurukula instructs that you will know that the target is correct when you receive a confirmation through an omen or dream. You must receive a confirmation through an omen or dream.
What do you mean correct? If it's your choice of target because you are targeting the psychopaths, the perpetrators, the banking cabal, whatever, what do you mean it's correct?
By correct, I mean that it's appropriate and plausible at that moment. After all, let's admit, there's no fucking lack of targets.
Yeah, we haven't got enough time.
There isn't enough time. We could sit here now and write a list of 100 targets. So, there is a selection process in the targets. And you, every one of you who wishes to be a Kalika warrior and practice this right, you heed the guidance of the supernatural that confirms to you, yes, this is the target. You don't choose it alone. You choose it by yourself.
Your mind is not your own, though.
Your mind is not your own.
When you're in planetary tantra.
That's right. Your mind is not your own. Your life is not your own. And so you, as part of this ritual, and you see how I learned this in the process of performing the ritual before January 15th. I didn't know this.
Well, you're always teaching what you're just learning.
I'm always teaching what I'm learning.
That's a visionary teacher, isn't it? So can you, how can people ensure that they're not having magical thinking with this omen, with the Kurukula instruction?
Something that you learn, just like anything else, you know. You learn tricks when you sail a boat. If you go snowboarding, you learn things about balance. You learn things about the angle of the way to approach a certain slope. No one can explain that to you beforehand. It's not abstract. It's experience. So you're going to learn
experientially
what is the difference between the true and the false imagination. And you're going to learn that true omens are verifiable. Look at the way this omen was verified.
Well, we'll talk about that very soon.
Yes. So let me complete, because there's a third factor, which is a third omen, which also occurs, which is confirmation of this ritual. So Tuesday, at the end of the lunar increment, which is the moment of tensegrity in the weaving of the planetary life web, in the weaving of Sophia's dreaming, there are moments of tension and tensegrity. The very last hours of that increment, I go back to Charlotte's Ridge with my accomplice. I re-rig the nail on the drawing cord, and I rig it absolutely skillfully so that it is clear that the sinker will hit the ground when the nail flips. Okay? So, the second time it is rigged correctly. I step away very, very delicately, step out from under the tree, step out from under the cording, step back, and we are standing, about 6 feet away from the cording. Closer. We take out...
We put our coats on to leave, we take out
the Shakti Cluster app.
The Shakti Cluster app.
The handheld app. I hold the handheld app up. We both do the ritual. We look at the blue dot to bring unity and solidarity to the right, and then shift the glance vertically to the kill spot the black dot. At the exact moment that we shift our glance to the kill spot, the nail toggles. Before our eyes and right in front of our eyes. Right?
Yeah.
But there is still yet another anomaly. Is still yet another anomaly. Even though the nail toggles and the sinker hits the ground, the nail remains hung in the drawing cord, and the drawing cord remains tangled in the cording. So at that point, we're looking at this rusty nail hanging in the drawing cord like a person hanging from a rope who happened to have hanged themselves. The nail is hanging there, and we think, what do we make of this, right? We didn't know. That's just the way it went. So we left it at that, and we walked away from Charlotte's Ridge. And then a couple of days later, I went on a journey. I'll pass it over to you.
So you went on a journey for a month.
Yes.
And the day before you came back from your journey, I went to check on the cording intermittently, not very often, but intermittently. I went over there and the nail was still hanging there like a person that had happened to hang themselves. And then the day before you returned, I went over to the ritual, the cording, and about 7 meters. How many yards is that for the Americans?
That's 7 yards.
7 yards. 7 yards. About 7 yards away, 7 meters away from the cording, there was a fox.
On the track, right?
Well, it's not a track because it's not a track. It's not a road. You know, it's so in the middle of nowhere. It's not a track. It's just somewhere that we happen to walk to get there. There's a dead fox, and I go over to the fox, and it is literally this fox. There's no blood coming out of its mouth. There's no injury to its body. It's literally like this fox has died in mid-run, in mid-air. It just died where it was, in mid-air. Its legs were tucked under it. Its mouth was open. I picked the fox up and I checked it all over for any sight of injury, and it was young.
And you smelled it?
Well, I used to be around a lot of British aristocrats that fox hunted, which obviously I hated, and they say all sorts of vile things about foxes. And one of the myths that they told me was that foxes have very incredibly smelly and dirty mouths. So I got this beautiful. I mean, she was young. It was a vixen. I checked. She was young, really young. She was beautiful. I think she'd been dead less than 24 hours. She had rigor mortis, but there were no flies or. And I picked her up and checked her all over to see if there were any injuries, and I couldn't see any, nothing coming from her mouth. And I sniffed her mouth, and she smelled beautiful. Which is ironic because foxes have got a very, very distinct, strong smell that's quite noxious. But she smelled fresh and beautiful. And so I carried her. I picked her up and I carried her to the cording and buried her under some ferns close to the cording, and said a little goodbye to her.
So that was another omen. This is objective. This is in the real world. This is verifiable. And finally, when I came back on February 14th, the day of the Florida event, and I gave myself a day or two, and I think it was on the 16th maybe, that I walked alone down to the cording, and the nail was gone, and the drawing cord was gone.
Sorry, when I checked the cord, I went there to check the cording, and the fox was there. The nail was still there.
Right, the nail was still hanging.
The nail was still hanging on that.
When you found the dead fox.
Yeah.
But when I came back, the nail had fallen.
Not only had the nail fallen, but the black cord that the nail is hung on was nowhere to be seen. The nail was nowhere to be seen.
That's right, it disappeared.
Gone.
And I've had that experience before in Andalusia of doing cordings or doing offerings in dishes to the dakinis and having it entirely disappear in an inexplicable way. So that was how it played out. And I'm happy to be able to have this conversation in this new format. It's comfortable for me to relate sort of anecdotally what happened, and at the same time to impart to all of you out there what I consider to be the spectacular precision of the elements that played into this ritual. Okay? So finally we're going to close with a little bit of entertainment referring back to the Mandela effect, right?
Well, you said that the Mandela effects were going to fade away. And there's been, I don't follow them so much because they're so spurious, and I don't think they're true Mandela effects. You know, you taught us in the Super Learning event that it's about the ping.
Yeah.
It's about the ping, but there is a limit to the ping, you know.
That's right.
A lot of them are very spurious, and, you know, Richie from Boston, they're just, you know, they just got to speak every day to their, you know, Patreon crowd. So
and they're lost in the sauce.
And they're
stalled on the pings.
Because it's quantum mechanics.
Right. They're going into all kinds of speculation and magical thinking.
However,
I did say
there were two.
Right. I did say that there might be a couple more, or even one really spectacular Mandela effect that would come from you-know-who, the planetary animal mother herself, the Aeonic mother, Sophia, that would come from her to confirm that the magic is on, to confirm that she knows that we know that she is interactive with us. And so it so happens that around this time, I think, maybe I can't know exactly when, it might have been a little before the ritual, but certainly I discovered it immediately after. There were two Mandela effects.
It was around the same time we sat in the kitchen and discussed it.
Yeah. And the first of these effects concerns the most famous, I believe, album of Pink Floyd, which was called, drumroll please,
The Dark Side of the Moon.
No. It's not called The Dark Side of the Moon.
What?
It's called, that's good play acting. It's called Dark Side of the Moon.
So they dropped the.
They dropped the.
The Mandela effect dropped the.
Right. So in the occluded or former version, it's the dark side of the moon. But presumably in the current version, occluding version, it's dark side of the moon.
Mm.
Okay. Well, I would have you recall that the Charlotte Working was performed, passive voice. I performed the Charlotte Working in the dark of the moon. It was performed under the dark side of the moon. And that was a very, very special and rare dark moon. Yeah. Because it was framed by a wolf moon, it was framed by a supermoon, it was connected with the lunar increment, with the...
Well, 15 factors.
15 different factors played into the uniqueness of that dark of the moon. The Charlotte Working happened in the dark of the moon.
Yeah. And
a very special, not just in dark of the moon, because the moon is in darkness once a month, but in the dark of the moon at that particular moment. Mm-hmm. That's when it happened. Mm-hmm. Second Mandela effect, and it gets even better, concerns this funny little creature, which again is a mythological hybrid. Mm. The griffin is a mythological hybrid. It's said to be part bird, part fox, part lizard, whatever.
Part eagle.
Part eagle. There is another mythological hybrid to which we in Planetary Tantra are highly, highly devoted. And that is the goatfish, or sea goat. Okay? Now there's been some confusion about this constellation and the name Capricorn in the discussion of the Mandela effect.
Yeah, because, and again, you know, people are grasping at straws for the entire time with the Mandela effect decoded, and Capricorn is now a goatfish. When was it? It's always been the goatfish.
That's right.
It's always been the goatfish.
Those who claim that Capricorn was previously the goat, they remember it as being the goat, but now it's a sea goat or goatfish, and that's a Mandela effect, are totally wrong. That is not a correct Mandela effect. I'm not going to explain why, and just take my word for it at the moment.
I'm a Capricorn, so I know it's always been goatfish.
Right. Capricorn, by the way, is the name of the sign of the zodiac, and goatfish or sea goat is the name of the constellation. And that particular constellation is next to the constellation of the Archer, which is Kurukula.
Which is where you were on the cusp. You literally did that ritual on the cusp. Within that 3-day lunar increment, you did that ritual on the cusp of the Kurukula shift and the
Kali shift.
The Kali shift.
Right. Because the Dakini power of the telluric potency of the earth connected with the goatfish is Kali or Mahakali.
Kalima.
Kalima. Or
which
Mahakali.
She's your...
who is my guardian. Right. So, this is fantastic. This is fabulous. I prefer fabulous because fantastic goes into delusion. This is really fabulous. When you see the precision of this ritual, the shift is passed each month like the relay torch of a race. And at the moment when the relay was passing from Kurukula, who is the sublime mistress of witchcraft, to Mahakali, who is the ultimate protector of the Rome and of humanity and the earth. Bingo! At that exact instant.
The Mandela effect was my pet goat.
Or the pet goat.
Now, if you don't know about My Pet Goat, that is the book that George Bush Jr. happened to be reading. That famous, iconic scene where he sat in an elementary school in America reading a book. He probably had it upside down, actually. And an aide came in and whispered in his ear, and that's the moment that he allegedly discovered that the Twin Towers had been attacked by the Islamic Brotherhood.
And he faked his surprise.
Right. He always looks surprised, actually, to be fair. So anyway, he was reading that book, My Pet Goat, to the children.
But now it turns out that the title of that book is The Pet Goat. And this is a genuine Mandela effect. This effect is another omen, in a way. It's not just a Mandela effect, but it's an omen confirming the Charlotte working.
Yeah. You love goats, John, don't you? It's yours.
First of all, I had a pet goat. There are pictures on the internet of me with my pet goat, Margarita, my daughter.
Yeah.
So there are pictures of the Turton with his pet goat. But not only that, to all of us in Planetary Tantra, and to you who are coming in and invited into the practice, the goatfish and Mahakali are recognized and loved as the guardians and overseers. You know? So we love the goatfish image.
Yeah, and it's another reason that the goat has been demonized. You know, they've played on the Baphomet character. It's another reason, you know, it's
Pan, and they turned Pan into Saturn and made Pan, the nature god, evil. The goat is evil. The inverted pentagram. All that is nonsense.
Yeah, it's all misdirection.
Misdirection and Zenosh programming to turn you against the beauty and power of your natural instincts.
But the goat also is a Gnostic animal.
It's Gnostic slang.
It's Gnostic slang because there is that famous, only because you've made it famous to people who read you, there's that lovely, beautiful sentence, "Kid, thou hast fallen into milk."
That's right. Which was the welcoming formula into the mysteries for those who saw the organic light. So the goats themselves, the Telesta, the initiates, were called goats. And then those neophytes who were welcomed into the Gnostic circles were called kids. A kid, thou hast fallen into milk. So the goat is something not only precious to us in planetary Tantra, but is something of paramount sacred value to humanity. It cannot be turned into the devil. It cannot be perverted and subverted into something that represents evil.
In conclusion here, John, how have you decoded these two Mandela effects?
Well, it's my sense that the use of the word "the" points to the third attention, and it points to the third person.
Yeah, because my pet goat is
the first person. It's mine. It's my pet goat.
It's mine, and it's, you know, how can it change from mine to thee? It's like an inanimate object now. But my pet goat is in the first person. The pet goat is in the third person. So it's first attention, third attention.
That's right. Toggling, and it shows that indeed the Mandela effect confirms what she, who is the source of the effect, is doing. She is using the third attention,
which you predict. You don't like to predict, but you did say that.
Which I described as an instrument to penetrate into the realm of the first attention. So, in doing so, she is making my pet goat the pet goat for anyone who wants to adopt that goat. You see? And so it's brilliant direction from the planetary animal mother, coming exactly at the moment of the performance of the Charlotte working. So regarding the other Mandela effect pertinent to that ritual, well, the name of the album, The Dark Side of the Moon, points to the ritual. And the lyric, I'll meet you on the dark side of the moon, is kind of an invitation into the magic.
And this is her sense of humour again, isn't it? You know?
Exactly. You can see the sense of humour that overpowers the mechanisms of deceit more and more as this adventure unfolds. So,
on that note, we'll end there. We're going to do another recorded conversation very soon. I hope you enjoyed this first Radio Gaianym broadcast, and stay tuned for the next show.